Hello, everybody. You know what? I love Bette Davis. I'm not ashamed to admit it. She is one of my favorite actresses. Actresses. So yes, I love her, but calm down. She's been dead for quite some time, so she doesn't have to worry about me stalking her. Maybe in the afterlife. Anyway, what happened is I watched recently a movie from 1955 called The Virgin Queen, starring Bette Davis, Joan Collins, and Richard Todd. And it just shows me why Bette Davis is one of my favorite actresses of all time. Because this movie sort of happened towards the end of her career. I mean, we can't really say the end of her career because her career lasted like 5, 6 decades, but it it happened after kind of at the tail end of her first peak, let's say. She would go on to star, I think, in All About Eve the next year when she would win an Oscar, or maybe it was the year before. Let me just check that. I'm going to check that because it's hard to remember. All About Eve. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, All About Eve. So, basically, Bette Davis, she was like huge in the 40s and then in the late 30s, early 40s, and then her star kind of waned. And because, she was a young actress and she was getting older. And then in 1950, she starred in All About Eve and she won an Oscar. And so that kind of like put her up again into people's minds. So this movie is kind of like after that second peak. And it just shows why she is so great as an actress. She's not afraid to take wild chances, chances that might not work for anybody else, and they might not work for her. Like, for example, this portrayal of Queen Elizabeth, I think is really interesting, but it's not a very modern perspective on her, but I think it's actually a correct perspective. I remember going to London and going to Westminster Abbey and standing next to her grave that's like very ornate and just thinking like how many people did this woman kill, and she's got this like great grave because she was a tyrant. Her father was a tyrant. Like English kings and queens at those times were tyrants. They only mellowed out after a while. And it seems like Bette Davis's portrayal of Queen Elizabeth is more like Queen Victoria because she's short and not very pleasant, very irritable. And whereas now, if you think about the two most recent movies, the more famous ones about Queen Elizabeth, I think it's Queen Elizabeth the Golden Age, and I think the other one's just called Queen Elizabeth, starring Kate Blanchett. Like, obviously, Kate Blanchett, much more attractive figure, right? So they're making her, and in those movies, she's kind of like a feminist icon, I would say, that, she's doing her thing in a man's world and she is the queen and she's kicking butt. And I think Queen Elizabeth did have those traits, but she also had a lot of negative traits. So this is a very negative portrayal of Queen Elizabeth, and I like that because it cuts through the propaganda. And even though it's a negative portrayal of Queen Elizabeth, it's really, really sympathetic because there's a scene where Bette Davis takes off her like wig and they show you that she's bald, right? She doesn't have any. She's got like wispy hair, and she says something like, I bedazzled many men, not because of the way that I look, and not because of my position as Queen of England, but because my brain bedazzles them or my wit or whatever. So there's that really powerful moment. And I think it's a very sympathetic portrayal too, because Queen, even though she's right, she has bedazzled a lot of men, she never chose anyone. And she wants to choose someone. And this movie is all about a person that she may have potentially chosen to be her king. And that was Sir Walter Raleigh. So Sir Walter Raleigh is this sort of like English adventurer, and you might know him from the famous story where he puts his cloak on the ground and then Queen Elizabeth can like walk on it and not walk in this puddle. And that moment in the movie is kind of ridiculous because the puddle is like super small and she could walk around it, but he like sacrifices this and is very gallant or whatever. And so he kind of like wins the queen's heart. And you can tell as a queen, she's fascinated by him, but more as a woman, she's fascinated by him. And he's got this project that he wants to go to America because the French are in America, the Spanish are in America, and he thinks England should be in America. So he wants the queen to give him some ships so he can go to America and steal some stuff, basically. But he's like this swashbuckling adventurer. And I'll tell you a bit more about that plot in a moment, but let's back up a little bit. The other thing is that he falls in love with a lady in waiting, and the lady in waiting, I guess that they were controlled by the queen. The queen could say who they would marry, and they would be married off politically because obviously the queen isn't married. She doesn't have children. So this is the way politics was done at that time. So yeah, they fall in love and they keep it a secret. And when the queen finds out about this, she's very furious. One, because of the reason I said it, because basically these women are kind of her property. That's one thing. And the other thing is, like, I think she really did love Sir Walter Raleigh. And Bette Davis does a great job of showing that. Like, she's like this very witty woman, but she is, also has a heart, right? So she reacts in a way that is very kind of over the top, and she throws him in the tower and she's going to execute them, but she kind of like changes her mind because she loves the guy and she wants some booty from America. Not booty like we're talking about, but treasure from America. So yeah, I'll say one more thing about Bette Davis's. Well, I'll get back to Bette Davis in a moment. And I promised that I'd tell you about that plot. So it did happen that Sir Walter Raleigh was arrested by the Queen when the Queen found out that he had married one of her ladies in waiting. But that actually happened after one of his trips to America. So I think he went to America like 3 or 4 times, which is crazy. Like good English ships there. So he went to America. He came back. He was the guy who popularized tobacco. And after one time he came back, he was arrested and he was put in the tower and the Queen forgave him. So that part is true in the movie, but it doesn't really happen in the movie the way it did in real life. And I think the reason is because they want to have this reason that Sir Walter Raleigh is sticking with the Queen, because they have like these moments where he's yelling at her, right? And she's the Queen, so she can have him killed at any time, and almost does, So, so they want to show that there is a reason that Raleigh betrays his principles because he wants these ships, right? But I think in real life it was a bit more complicated than that. So, the other thing that's great about this movie, apart from Bette Davis's wild performance, it is two things. One, there's lots of color. And I know that's a weird thing to say in a movie because we've had color movies for, I don't know, 80 years, almost 100 years now. But I don't know, if you've seen a movie recently, all of the colors look really, really faded. And this is Elizabethan England. It would be so colorful, and it is. And the costumes are just wonderful to look at. And you can tell that they spent so much money on this movie, and it looks great. And the cinematography is also great, although it's not a movie where you're looking at the scenery, let's just say. It's not like Stanley Kubrick's classic movie that I forgot off the top of my head, but it's not a movie where you're looking at the scenery. The scenery is not a character. So that's one good thing. The other thing, which is kind of crazy to point this out, because the movie is not full of action. It's more about this sort of love triangle between the Queen and Raleigh, and Raleigh's love interest played by Joan Collins. But there is great sword play. So there's two sword fights. One happens in the beginning of the movie, and one happens when they're going to arrest Raleigh. And the sword fights are really, really well choreographed. And it's not like they just cha 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 cha, and then that's it. Or it's not like they're static and they're like, oh yeah, I'm good. The movie comes from a time when people really knew how to fight with swords. And they knew that the sword was something like an instrument in a fight. And in this particular fight, they're like fighting with swords, but then they use other things, like they throw things at each other, they throw chairs, and it's really, really good. And the other fight towards the end of the movie, they start without swords, but there's like sword in it, and like the fighting is so, I mean, not beautifully because it's a fight, but it's so well choreographed. Like you can tell that these fights are choreographed by people who understood fighting, and how you make fighting look good on the screen. Because with other sword fights in modern, I don't even think there's been a movie with a good sword fight in recent memory. If you can think of a good movie with a good sword fight, put it in the comments. That came out in the last 10, 15 years, because as I said, I think that is a skill that they lost, because a lot of movies in the 1950s, 40s, 30s, they were full of sword fights. So you had people who really understood how to fight with swords. So Richard Todd and Joan Collins are okay in the movie, but they kind of they do not go in the direction that Bette Davis goes in, so they're more grounded. And it makes sense, because I don't think that you could have every character act like Bette Davis. And Bette Davis's portrayal of Queen Elizabeth works because she's basically like a really rich person that no one literally can say no to, because she's the queen. And she says something like that. She says something like, the titles that I give are empty, but what else can I give you? I can give you riches and titles, but nothing else. And people always say the things that I want to hear because they want the empty titles and that. So kind of interesting. So another thing to talk about Betty's performance is that she was never good at accents. Never good at accents, even though some of her most famous portrayals of her are of her portraying a southern character, like in Jezebel. But I think in Jezebel, I think she was better at southern accents than she is at British accents, because her accent for Queen Elizabeth feels sort of like very muddled and feels like more on the British side of the mid-Atlantic accent. If you don't know what that mid-Atlantic accent is, it's when Bette Davis and Joan Collins and the actresses from that generation, they spoke. Usually they would speak in this accent. And it was because people from different parts of America had different accents, and they wanted to have something that everybody could understand when they went to the movies and they listened to the radio. So it's kind of muddled, but on the other hand, now that I say that, I think it makes a lot of sense that Bette Davis has this sort of muddled, hard to understand accent, because if we were to be transported back in time, we think that we would be able to understand somebody like Shakespeare or Queen Elizabeth I, and we would not, because their accents would sound different to us. They wouldn't sound familiar at all because language changes. Plus, the words that they use would also sound different. So it kind of makes sense that we don't understand everything that Queen Elizabeth says. But then the other characters, you can understand them perfectly. So kind of a weird choice, but Bette Davis, a great actress who made very daring choices. So, should you watch this movie? Yeah, you should watch this movie. I think that this is a very entertaining movie. Is it the best Bette Davis movie? I would say no. It's not the best Bette Davis movie. That would be something like All About Eve. So that would be her more serious work. And then her kind of like crazy later period when she was just so over the top, which is also wild and great to see. Um, I'm thinking movies like Double Jeopardy, I think it's called. Yeah, no, not Double Jeopardy. Maybe it is Double Jeopardy, the one where she plays twins, and the one twin murders the other one. Spoiler alert for the movie that came out 40 years ago, 60 years ago. Anyway, yeah, so it's not like wildly over the top because it makes sense, and it's not like super serious. And she did play Queen Elizabeth the First. She did play her in another movie that I would like to see called The Secret Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, but she played Elizabeth when she was much younger, much like Kate Blanchett. So that would be an interesting watch, which I will eventually watch because I am watching all Bette Davis's films. I'm trying to be the most prolific reviewer of all time, and I get caught in these crazy side quests, and that's definitely one of them. So if you want to support what I do, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Please leave a comment. If you have fingers, I guess, or if you're able to leave a comment. I don't know why I said that. I don't want to discriminate against people who don't have fingers. All right, yeah. Anyway, I've been talking too much. Yeah, great movie. Go watch it. All right, bye.